Supervisors meeting, recorded March 19, 2019.
It's 5 o'clock. We'll call the county board to order.
Go figure.
First item is pledge allegiance.
Roll call.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Everybody
It's the
stand up.
sunny weather that's got me. So, first we'll do roll call.
We'll do whatever you do.
All here press yes and confirm.
Twenty-one present.
Now we'll do the pledge allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation,
under God, indivisible,
with liberty and justice for all.
Invocation by Dan Martinson.
Thank you for this opportunity. I'd like to take a moment to give thanks to the many gifts that are bestowed upon us by where we live. Portage County's residents and natural beauty make it an amazing place to live and raise a family. Its people value education and hard work, and the sense of community is embodied by the rich network of volunteers who are the heartbeat and backbone of our community, reflect the desire to give back by so many. Our public workers, especially the firefighters and law enforcement who keep us safe, work tirelessly and give selflessly, allowing us to live with the confidence that we are secure and protected. Having lived here for most of my life, I can safely say that much of our community has remained the same through the years, but its populace has grown ever more diverse over time. Inherent in that diversity are differing beliefs and opinions which strengthen us, but also challenge government to ensure that all voices are heard and the needs of all residents are met. In order to serve all of Portage County's residents, I ask that we strive to use reason, wisdom, and empathy in all our deliberations. My grandmother, who died a little less than a year ago and who would have turned 101 this month, believed that the best way to serve is to serve locally, and always encouraged me to give back to my community. As a farm girl from rural Wisconsin, she learned that if everyone worked for the benefit of the community, a strong and inclusive society would be the foreseeable outcome. I'm proud to be part of a board that embodies her spirit and ideals, working together for the betterment of a diverse citizenry. I pray that, as a board, we always take that sentiment to heart and work to meet the needs and expectations of our fellow citizens and to continue to make Portage County a wonderful place for all residents, regardless of income, ethnicity, gender, religion, sexuality, or disability, so that they may find community, purpose, and opportunity, and to continue to feel that they are secure and protected. Thank you.
Good job, Dan.
Thank you.
Review and approval of minutes, February 19th, 2019, County Board meeting minutes. Motion by Barry Jakowski, seconded by Charlie Gussel. Any corrections or changes? All those in favor with aye? Aye. Opposed? Minutes are approved. Correspondence.
Wisconsin Counties Association appointment letter of Chair Al Haga to the Wisconsin Counties Association's County Ambassador Program Team. Wisconsin Counties Association appointment letter of Supervisor Melissa Johnson to Wisconsin Counties Association's County Ambassador Program Team. And a letter from Nathan Check, Highway Commissioner, reporting on 2019 winter maintenance budget and activities.
I just wanted to speak to those. The reason that I had Melissa and mine on there was I wanted the people to know that we were involved in that in case they had topics or things that they wanted us to take forward, that we were the contacts and that we were involved in it. Also with the highway commissioners, I know with the events that we've had, and we always talk about the shortcomings and the weather, how it's changed things, I thought it was important and maybe an eye-opener for a lot of people to see some of the numbers and how fast and how quickly they can change their budgets. And when you talk about, using extra fuel, month of January was 22,600, and then for February it was like 37,000 gallons of fuel. It's like, yeah, these are big numbers when we talk about some of these things. So this year was extremely hard on us. So and then also I wanted to make people aware that we still have our plow trucks getting run into, that people are not giving them the space and they're not slowing down or doing what they need to do. So I thought it was important that you folks hear that, and not just the Highway Committee and the rest of the public as well. They need to slow down and stay away from the trucks. So thank you for that, Nathan. All right, public comments. Members of the public who wish to address the county board on specific agenda items must register their requests at this time, with such comments subject to reasonable control of county board chair as set forth in Robert's Rule of Order. Anybody from the public that wishes to speak? Okay. Approval of Executive Operations Committee reappointments and appointments. If nobody has any objections, I'll take these all in one as they are printed. Okay. I'll take a motion to approve them. Motion by Chris Dubek, seconded by James Gifford. All in favor with aye? Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. Confirmation of county executive reappointments. And if nobody has any objections, we'll take that as printed as well. Take a motion. Motion by Barry Jakowski, seconded by Don Jakowski. All those in favor with aye? Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Presentations. Patty Benedict, introduction, land and water conservation awareness speaker, contest participant Samantha Carlson, speech titled Growth Starts in the Soil.
Thank you for having us today. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Patty Benedict. I work in the Land and Water Conservation Division of the Planning and Zoning Department. One of the objectives that's in our Land and Water Resource Management Plan, which is undergoing an update in 2019 and you'll get to see later in the year, is to promote youth education programs, and that includes our poster and speaking contests. So we hold those every year. The speaking contest has 3 divisions. There's an elementary division, which is grades 5 and 6. Junior division is grades 7 and 8, and a senior division, which is 9 through 12. The speakers research conservation, environmental, or natural resource-related topics. They practice their speeches, and then they perform first at the county contest. Our county contest was held January 8th. The first place speakers in the county contest advanced to the 9-county area that we belong to, and that includes Wood, Portage, Marathon, Langlade, Lincoln, Oneida, Vilas, Forest, and Florence counties. So if they advance to the area contest and take first place there, then they go on to a state contest. The winners at the state contest perform their speeches, and the winners in all of the divisions then do their speeches during our opening lunch at our annual conference, which was held last week. So we had 2 speakers in our senior division. Annika Waltenberg is a 9th grade student from Amherst High School. She placed first, but due to some scheduling conflicts could not go on to the area contest. Samantha Carlson is a 10th grade student at Carlson Higher Education. She took 2nd place and was invited to go to the area contest, but unfortunately she couldn't make it there either because of scheduling conflicts. So we are now giving Samantha another opportunity to do her speech, as Al said, entitled Growth Starts in the Soil. Please welcome Samantha.
My name is Samantha, and I'm in 10th grade, as she said, and I just turned 15. So I want you to imagine a loaf of bread with the warm, good insides and the lightly toasted outsides. Soil is the crust of the bread. It creates the basic needs of life. Soil is a water filtration system, a food provider, and a recycler. Agriculture means the growth of plants and food, but agriculture is so much more. It provides the clothes on our backs and the foods in our bellies. We depend on the richness of the soil. It includes the quality of our water resources and keeps the balance of our ecosystem. We should use conservation methods to ensure our futures. Everyone has heard about recycling, but recycling soil? What does that mean for us? Saprotrophs means decomposers. Without microbes surrounding the pollutants, waste and corpses would be everywhere. Thousands of single-celled fungi and bacteria take things apart. Mushrooms and other multi-celled fungi can get into the act too. Worms and invertebrates break down the waste. Earthworms let air and rainwater filtrate through the soil when they create their tunnels. It fuels the plants with food. Dead branches and animals composing creates quality soil. Instead of throwing it in the trash where it'll rot, we can bury it so the soil can use it. We need to protect our fungi because it's a lot like the iceberg, where most of the organism is underneath the ground. Forestation and fragmenting habitats changes the land usage and kills the species of fungi. Without public education, some of our plants will not survive. We need to add it to our school curriculum to bring awareness to our kids. Soil also purifies and cleans invaluable water. 70% of Earth is water, but 2.5% is fresh. But most of it is frozen. 2.5% is fresh groundwater. Soil means safe drinking water. Physical filtration acts like a screen, holding back particles and bacteria. Microorganisms degrade and transform organic and inorganic substances. Microbes are like bacteria, algae, and fungi. Toxins and pollutants are harmless after they've had their way with them. Filtration also occurs chemically. Soil clays have a negative charge that attract the positive charges like heavy metals, salts, and pesticides. Evaluating the state of soils is the initial step to conserving. Different soil types filter water differently. Adding needed components will increase effectiveness. Wisconsin farmers are trying their best to protect soil by no-till farming and crop cover agriculture. After the crop is taken off the field, a cover crop that will survive the winter is planted. That way, there is always something growing and holding the soil together. It saves money for the farmers to no-till before planting. People with small gardens can help too. Certain bugs and plants keep soil healthy. We can mix it up a little and plant different kinds of plants. Evening primrose and basket of gold attract insects that prey on other insects that harm our gardens. As you can see, there are many ways that soil helps the way we live every day. Because of soil filtrating and recycling, it is a basic need of life that holds our ecosystem together, like the loaf of bread. Soil helps us with growth, water, and recycling. We need to protect it. If we take care of our soil, we can grow more successful and take care of our planet. Thank you.
Anybody have any questions or comments for Samantha?
Not more than I do.
Do you want to introduce the next one?
Sure. Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to Samantha, and I also want to thank the parents of all of our participants in the poster and speaking contest. They've supported them and encouraged them to learn more about our environment, and I really appreciate that, and we all appreciate that. So, and Samantha, I hope we see you again next year. Okay, we ready for the posters then? Okay, so the National Association of Conservation Districts chooses and announces the theme for the poster contest each year, and usually late spring, early summer. And then, well, the theme topics include water, soil, habitat, forestry, and then a topic of interest such as pollinators or other environmental interests. So I send information out to Portage County schools and residents to promote the contest and give them the guidelines and deadlines. Posters are judged at the county level first, and as with the speaking contest, the first place winners go on to the area contest. And then if they win first at the area, they go on to state, et cetera. The poster contest, however, has a national contest. And Portage County has had a number of national contest entries. And in 2016, we actually had a winner, and she took home a $200 cash prize, which was pretty exciting. So now I'm happy to announce the poster winners for Portage County. Most of the awards for the first, second, and third places have been, I've already done those in school presentations, but we do have some winners here that I'll announce. And they can come up and accept their awards when I call them. So in the primary division, grades K through 1, that's this poster. The first place was Vivian Lubinsky. She's a first grader at Roosevelt School. Second place was Gia Harris. She's also in first grade at Roosevelt. And third place was Amelia Yang, first grader at Roosevelt School. I went to their classroom and presented all their awards already. In the elementary division, Caitlin McNally is a third grader at Washington Elementary School. She took second place, and I did her award at her school. First place went to Matthew Carlson. If you can come up, Matthew. He's a second grader with Carlson Higher Education. Matthew took first place in the Portage County contest, first place in the area contest. Matthew's no stranger to the poster contest. He also took first place last year in the Portage County and area contest, going on to state, and he took second place at state last year. So Matthew's poster is on the far right. And for his efforts, this was his area contest trophy. This is his Portage County first place. That is a $15 gift certificate, Portage County gift certificate. And then he gets a bunch of certificates of participation and a ribbon. Okay, in the middle division, which is grades 4 through 6, third place went to Sienna Velasco. She's a fifth grader at Rosholt High School, and there's a whole class of students at Rosholt that I'll be doing an awards presentation next week. Second place went to Sierra Waltenberg. She's a fourth grader at Amherst Elementary School, and Sierra is also no stranger to our poster contest. She's been in every year since she's been in kindergarten and does very well. First place goes to Aiden Kazda. He's a fifth grader at Kazda Academy for Life. So Aiden took first place in the county contest and unfortunately did not place at the area contest, but there was some pretty stiff competition. So he also gets a Portage County gift certificate and ribbons and certificates. In the junior division, grades 7 through 9, third place went to Kaylin Kazda. She's in 7th grade, Kazda Academy for Life. And Kaylin received, this is Kaylin's poster, by the way. She did a very nice job as well. And she gets, for third place, you get a $5 Portage County gift certificate. And then your certificates and a ribbon. Second place went to Annika Waltenberg, 9th grade at Amherst High School. And again, she's been very active in our contests, both poster and speaking. First place goes to Kirsten Kazda, 8th grade at Kazda Academy for Life. Not only took first place in the area, or local and area, she also took first place at state. So you will be going on to, your poster is going on to the national contest. This is from the area contest. This is from the state contest. You also won this prize at the state contest.
Oh, cool.
So again, a special thanks to the families. I also want to thank the Land and Water Conservation Committee. They've been huge supporters of our youth programs. We have these poster and speaking contests. We also have 2 conservation camps that we sponsor a scholarship to, and they're very supportive of those. And the Wisconsin Envirothon is coming up. The Wisconsin Envirothon takes place on April 12th at the Wisconsin Lions Camp. And this is a competition of high school and middle school teams from around the state, and they test in the areas of wildlife, aquatic ecology, forestry, soils and land use, and then they also do a presentation in a current issue, which this year is called Agriculture and the Environment, Knowledge and Technology to Feed the World. And our county executive, Chris Holman, is going to be a judge for those presentations. So we're excited about that. So I thank you all. Please encourage your children, grandchildren to participate in any of our youth conservation programs, and contact my office if you have any issues or problems. Bob.
Supervisor Bob Gifford.
Yeah, those contest presentations are one of the highlights of being on Land and Water Conservation.
Supervisor Barry Jakowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As committee chair of the Land and Water Conservation Committee, I would like to not only thank but congratulate all the youth for participating. And I think we should give a round of applause to Patty Benedict. She single-handedly, or almost single-handedly, runs our youth education program for Land and Water Conservation, does a tremendous job, and puts a heck of a lot of effort of her own time into it. So let's give Patty a round of applause.
I always enjoyed the speech and the poster part of Land and Water when I was on it as well, and I want to thank the young folks that were here. It's always good to see you people involved at the young age, and I always enjoy the speeches because I see them at our church where the young folks get up and talk, and it takes a lot of courage to be able to do that, and especially in today's day and age. But so we've got Kazda family 3 and Carlson 2. You're down by 1, so thanks for all your participation. So, thank you, Patty. Chris Holman, County Exec, and Alvin Winters, Procurement Director, County Update.
Thanks. Good evening. Before I get into this piece, I just want to acknowledge this thing we're all very familiar with, and the fact that we experienced quite a bit of flooding this past week in the county. We are still kind of in the aftermath in terms of assessing everything that went right and wrong and getting people who suffered a lot of damage the help they need. I think, though, that in general the response was very well done, especially considering that our emergency management department's relatively new, and the EOC is also, not something that you fire up on a regular basis. So I do want to bring you guys a more thorough update once we have all of the details and, the full picture of everything that took place. But what I can certainly do now is thank everybody involved, and that's, everyone from the Highway Department and Commissioner Check to the municipalities who had their people out working on the roads and helping and coordinating, the EMS and fire who had to do their normal work within the flooding and then also respond to very specific stuff. First responders as well out in those municipalities were a big help. County staff in general, but also at the EOC. We spent a lot of time in there. And the emergency management team specifically, they've had a lot of stuff thrown at them in their short time within the county. So it's good to see that we're in good hands in that regard. Also, the volunteer organizations played a big role, whether that's 2-on-1 through the United Way or the Red Cross helping people out. It's a key part of the community that we don't always see it, but they're there and they're waiting, and when we need them, they show up, and that's a really big deal. We did get help from the state police as well. They sent about 8 officers up to help coordinate, which was nice, and everyone else, of course. There's a long list of people who were working on it, and the conditions were rapidly changing. There's a lot of kind of unpredictable ways the water moved, especially with the snowbanks in place. So it was a very challenging time, but I think that my next update on that will be able to give you kind of the lessons learned, the good things, and beyond. But without further ado, today I want to spend most of the time on the building project update, and I just want to stress that this is only an update. And I'll go through everything. You've got the slides there in front of you. And if you have questions, you can hold them to the end and we'll be able to answer those as we go through. Calvin and I will be able to provide information as we go, but then also whatever may come up as we work through the slides. So the update, again, is just to try to bring everybody up to speed. I know we've had a closed session meeting on this, talking about different pieces, but really as we move through the process, it made sense to me to say, okay, here's where we've been, where we've come from, the things we've looked at, and then kind of give you a rough idea of the sort of work that staff's been trying to do to kind of carry it forward, and then also get to the point where we can come back to you with pieces that you can actually, grapple with and really and dive into. So just a quick reminder how we got here, and I know it's been said quite a bit, but I do think it's worth stating that there's a lot of time that we've invested in this, whether it's, the beginnings of the discussions and all the different options we've looked at over the last 20 plus years. The takeaway for me is just that it's clear that there's a need here that we're trying to work on. Same with the infrastructure needs of the county being clear, because we've spent a lot of money and time and got a lot of consultant information to identify those areas for us. And so whether that's the old information we got years ago that's still relevant today or the new stuff, it all, I think, presents a pretty clear picture to me and to everyone. Most of the infrastructure, especially in the building projects that we're talking about, is tied to mandatory programs, which is an aspect that's important because it's something that we have to figure out how to work with one way or the other. It's not something necessarily that we can choose to opt out of, or we can kind of, patch and things like that. It's a key part of county operations is what I'm trying to say. So that's things like the jail and the courthouse. There's lots of statutory references to that. For today's discussion, the primary pieces of the puzzle, as you know, are the jail, the LEC, the courts, and the support staff, whether that be in this building or over in the annex. As I'm sure it's no surprise to anybody, the costs of doing business have certainly gone up and will likely to continue to go up. And in construction, they're going up because you've got a tight labor market. You've got Foxconn and other big projects in the state that are pulling a lot of resources down there. You've got tariffs on, so prices of steel is fluctuating. There's a lot of different trade issues that, play a key component of any sort of project wherever it's happening in the country, but it's an aspect of the cost piece. And I just threw some figures up there just to kind of normalize some of the cost differences, and we all know that things have gotten more expensive, but I think what's important is that so like in 1998, $1 million, today you have to spend $1.5 million to get the same thing in terms of your purchasing power. And when we talk about millions of dollars, it's really easy to kind of clam up because people don't generally talk on a day-to-day basis about spending tens of millions of dollars on anything. So it's important for me to kind of contextualize the amounts of money that we're talking about so that we don't get hung up per se on those, but see that if you look at the grand context of our project or any other project going on in the state, that it's all within the same realm. Like we're not in a unique situation of dealing with larger numbers. So weighing our options, historically, as you know, we've talked about 10 years ago, we had the $72 million Justice Center project. We had 9 years ago, we moved that to a $29 million courthouse project. And then 3 years ago, we had the $78.5 million jail and courthouse project. So we've been trying to take a stab at it here and there. But what's important to me on this slide is the current comparables. So as you see, the Oconto County Jail and LEC was finished last year. They spent $32 million on that. The Waukesha County Courthouse is currently under construction. Just the courthouse for them is $38.5 million. Dane County Jails, or Dane County in general, is in a really interesting position because they've got a public safety building that they wanted to build their jail on top of, and building up always adds some cost. And so what they were looking at was $75 million to build a jail on top of their public safety building. But once they got through all the process and authorizations, they figured out that it wasn't structurally sound to do that. So they discarded that idea and said, we can't move forward with this, obviously. They entertained the idea of building a new building right next to them, but that one building was going to cost them $150 million. So now they're readjusting and trying to figure out what to do next, but as you see, they're spending another $200 grand on another study to figure out where are we going, or where are they going more accurately. Closer to home, the Adams County Jail last year had a lot of conversations about what they needed to do. And the reason I reference them is because they got a phone call from the Department of Corrections saying, like, you're out of code, you're not in compliance, and you have 6 months to figure it out. Or worst case scenario, we shut you down, or maybe somewhere in between, we try to manage the situation in some other way to alleviate their concerns. The project that they were going to move forward with was just shy of $15 million, and that was basically going to glom on a couple additions to their current facility. So not a major project by any means, but similarly not a small number. So just to be clear about our project as we work through this, the numbers we will not be working with in Portage County is that as we went through the process and we had the full kind of assessment of needs and what people said that they wanted to get, the back of the napkin calculation, as you might put it, was roughly about $170 million, which is clearly a large number, but that also includes the jail, the courthouse, the law enforcement center, all the staff support, which are in these two buildings, a fleet garage. It's a lot of different pieces, so it's important to point that out. If you divided that into four, just the main pieces, you're right around $40 million each. The jail's a primary driver on cost, but that's not the jail's fault. That's the Department of Corrections saying, you have to do this, you have to do that. And there's no way to get around it. And everyone in the state is in the same boat, whether their jail is 50 years old or 20 years old. They're all having to adjust to new requirements. So when we had that kind of brief conversation, staff worked alongside with the architects and ICS and Calvin and I. We had lots of conversations trying to say, well, clearly that's not a realistic number, so let's see what we can juggle around to figure out how we can walk it backward. We got closer to about $150 million, which again is still a large number, but when you split that four ways, now you're looking at $37.5 million, which, as you saw with the comparables, is much closer to what people are building in individual parts. So the bottom line with this slide is that it's still higher than we need to be. So what we've been doing in the meantime and continue to do is working with all of our partners on this to find the balance between projected costs for each piece, what it looks like as a whole, and then trying to take into consideration all the pieces that are driving costs up, and then figuring out what all can we do to either drive costs down or make the costs more palatable or more accessible to the county in terms of what sort of plan can we entertain when it comes to this project. So when I think about it, I think what's the ultimate goal? Really, for me, it's the long-term plan, and I mentioned this in our closed session meeting, that, you know, wherever we go with this, the important part is that when we walk away from the process, that we have a long-term plan we've articulated, it's something that's clear, that's something that we can look at and say, all right, we know where we are, we know where we're headed, and then if it's 10 years from now or 5 years from now, anybody can pick up the same plan and go, okay, here's the 25 years of work that got us to this point, here's what this board looked at and planned out for the next X number of years, and here's where we fit in that picture and what we should be looking at and what we need to be doing. Obviously, there's lots of details to that, but I think that if you have that picture and you can walk away from it, I think that's a success, however it looks like in the end. Ultimately, you're deciding, or we, rather, are deciding between lipstick on a pig, which is kind of our current infrastructure. It's aging, it's falling apart. There's lots of issues that need to be addressed no matter what happens in terms of the overall project goals. Or a completely new project all at once, you could see what that looks like, or something in between. So not acting or finalizing a plan, you know, obviously it is a choice that we could take, but I personally wouldn't recommend it based on what we know. And I just referenced what we all know. We had Mead and Hunt assess that jail to see what would he need to spend to bring it up to snuff for at least the near term, and that was roughly $27 million. And the point there is just to say that when we're talking about what can we entertain or can we afford, not deciding to do anything doesn't have any cost associated with it. There's still cost no matter which way we go on this. So just keep that in mind as we move forward. But ultimately, we can set ourselves and the future leaders of the county up for success. And this has been, needless to say, a complicated issue over time. Of course, you know that the city had a proposal. It was unanticipated, though timely. You've seen the press release on this. The Plan A there is articulated on the slide But ultimately, this is a plan that could work in the sense of shuffling different property pieces around in terms of ownership. You could clean up joint tenancy issues, but also the green space, as we talked about in closed session, offers up a 10 to 15% reduction in price, primarily because if you're building downtown and it's $170 million, that's, again, because you're building up 4 to 5 floors. It's also because there's a lot of infrastructure already in the ground, so you can't simply just scoop out the dirt and go. You got to be more surgical about it. And then you got traffic, you got parking, you got all that stuff. Those are all costs associated with that overall downtown picture, which wouldn't exist in the same form in a green space. The city county's building is still going to be mutually negotiated. That is still the same as it is now. There's clearly a presence here now. There's likely going to be a presence there into the near future. Same with 1039 Ellis. There's a number of ways we could deal with that as a county. I mean, it's ultimately our decision to figure out what makes the most sense. But just as an example, you could put it back on the market. If you don't end up building downtown and you end up building somewhere else, or even if you don't do anything at all, we can still say, well, what's our plan for the building? If we don't have one, then why do we have it? The 28th, we'll be getting a public input from a session that we've invited the public to. We try to give everybody a month time of heads up to say, if you want to come and have questions, that you've got plenty of heads up on that. I think that information plus the conversations that are ongoing, these are all very preliminary and conceptual in terms of what are the opportunities that we're looking at, and are there any of them that we want to pursue from the city side, from the county side. There could be other potential plans that come out of these conversations, but they would probably mirror something like you see there in Plan A. But to me, even just clearing up joint tenancy issues would be a win-win. So what's the near-term plan? Staff can speak with a lot of you without triggering a quorum, so I would encourage you to reach out and ask your questions. If we do get to a point where maybe there's a quorum that's going to be triggered, we can take the questions, provide the answers at the next meeting, so that any curiosity or piece of information that you don't have that you want to have, we can make sure shows up in the next committee meetings that are talking about this, and then also comes back to you as a discussion point on the county board floor. I'll be speaking with the Space and Properties and Finance committees to say, here are the pieces that we should talk about in April. So things like debt schedules, what's the debt tolerance of the county, how do we want to, look at this issue from their perspectives. And clearly anything that comes from them, whether it's a sense of the committee or a discussion point or eventually a resolution perhaps, that's going to come from them first, and then that will end up in here. So that would be in April. Our focus on staff is going to be continuing to work with our partners, bring you all the options for consideration that we feel are within the realm of possibility. We don't want to be in the business of saying, here's something that everybody knows is out of bounds, and so why are we wasting time talking about it? And that's part of the reason too about some of the pieces we're talking about today, is just to get them off the table, because they're really not germane to the discussion moving forward. But it's still important for you to know about it, because not only was it part of the process, it's important, I think, for you to see that staff has been doing a lot of work in trying to carry this forward and bring something to you that is good for the county. What to be thinking about in April and May. This is just me talking, but I feel like this is a real key focus area for the board. Your very first meeting as a board, you made a decision to move forward with the architects. It was a decision that was kind of weighty at the time, and but we had that information behind us to say, okay, here's the direction we've been handed, and you carried it forward and got us to this point. Obviously, when we have a new election, and it could lead to further postponement just because you have committees reshuffled, leadership's reshuffled. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm just pointing out the obvious, and that it will take time to kind of recalibrate, so to speak, so you can get this back onto the table in a way that people can actually, deal with it in a constructive way. So I would recommend that the board moves forward with a decision of some sort, maybe at the May meeting. If May is too soon, that's obviously something we can work forward to, but I think it's still important to try to set a goal and have a target for when we're looking at trying to figure out which way do we want to move forward. Whatever the decision is, we're laying the groundwork for those next steps. And the most important thing we can do is figure out what those paths are so that we can take all this information we've been accumulating over the years and figure out what sort of plan do we want to create out of that and then put it into action. And like I said before, there's plenty of details of this, but ultimately whatever that looks like, I think is what I would call progress. I put questions first, but I've read this, Our County, Our Storybook, and if you haven't read it, I recommend it, but I just found it to be funny because the issue of building a courthouse is nothing new and some of the complications. So I won't read through the quote there, it's all in your presentation. This will be online so people can read it, but this story is back in 1845 where the county board's trying to work with the contractor to get something done for $2,000. So 170 years later, prices have gone up, timelines have gotten longer, but I just thought it was a fun little note to end on anyway in terms of Portage County history. So with that being said, happy to answer some questions. I'll just leave it at that.
Go ahead. You.
Supervisor Zakowski.
Thank you, Executive Holman. Kind of a two-part question. Number one, I know it's a little early in the process, but will the county be putting together a FEMA application? And the second part of that question would be, are you going to invite the outlying municipalities to join in on that, or would you foresee them doing it by themselves?
Sure. This pertains to the flooding, of course. There's always a question of the threshold piece, and I don't know that Portage County has met that threshold for the FEMA piece yet. We're still tabulating, that's still ongoing, so the damage, some of the damage to the roads is, most of it was on the shoulders. I think there were a few washouts, but I think the real question that we still haven't answered yet is what's the final picture in terms of damage. But yeah, the county declared the emergency, as did Park Ridge and Plover, and it's in some ways, that's stating the obvious to everyone who's seen what's unfolding, but also it's a procedural step to open up access to federal and state resources. So we did all that. Certainly, whoever can fold into that process would be open to that, but that's ongoing communication. So that would be something I can come back to you with next time too, with more specific answers, or in the meantime as well.
Thank you. And one other thing on the second part of your presentation, when it comes to building facilities, I've worried about this from day one because the DOC seems to change their mind as to what needs to be in a jail about every 10 years. Is there some way that they can guarantee, or we can get, I should say, can we get guarantee from them that we don't start building a building and before it's done they say, well, you need this as well? And I've worried about that. When the minute we start talking about a jail, it seems the DOC has changed their rules and regulations about every 10 years. And I'm afraid by the time the building would be built, we're going to be out of compliance again.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, there are jails that are just 20 years old, which isn't too terribly old, but they're out of compliance, as you said, because things change at the state. I don't have a specific answer, but I can definitely reach out to them and say, kind of with that same message, like, we're not alone in trying to address these issues. There are many counties in the state that are looking at building a jail or a courthouse, which comes with their own requirements. But what's your kind of take on where you're at and where you're headed, and that kind of thing? How long is the latest and greatest going to be the latest and greatest? And I can give you their response on that once I get it. But I think it's a really good question. I don't know that it. I don't know. I think we're in some ways people who are moving forward with that. You're at their whim, I suppose. But I think in general, based on what we have and what other counties have, I know Kewaunee County is another one that's building a new jail. I think theirs is the oldest in the state. But similar questions, I'm sure they're having. So,
Thank you for guiding us down a crooked road.
Yeah, trying.
One of the requirements when we were looking at the architects was there's supposed to be a specialist in the field of jails. One of the firms, the other one is a specialist in the courthouse, and I would be hopeful that they would be on top of the game as far as what's changing, because that's what they're supposed to do. So we're hoping that we've got the best of the best, and we don't end up with making some of the same mistakes we had made in the past, and learn from them. So
that's Dewberry's side. That's their specialty, is law enforcement.
Well, we all know that, but if they change the...
Well, I understand that, but that is part of that's why they were brought in by the BWVRs, because that is their area of expertise.
That's it.
Trusting and relying on them find that information of the current trends and where things are going.
That Slade plan is only as good as the end result, though. That's what I'm worried about.
Supervisor Mua, you had a comment?
So I'm not sure if this is the space for me to ask this question, but as far as the city's proposal, has the city and county have had any conversations about accessibility of this building to county residents? And I'm saying that because now the jail and the courthouse is in the middle of the city, yet a lot of residents still have a hard time accessing services here. And I'm saying that from my experience, my 10-plus years experiences working as an interpreter in the courthouse, but also as a victim advocate who has to come in here frequently for restraining orders. And for a lot of folks, that's still a problem. Now, moving it out to such a place where transportation is going to be hard. And I've heard folks say to me before, transportation will come after. But I keep thinking about how many more people will be further criminalized while transportation is still being thought of. And I think for me to start thinking about this and having conversations with constituencies, I'd like to know if the city and county started having conversations about how we're going to make this more accessible.
No, it's a good question, and it's not a new one. I mean, as many others know much better than I, a ton of debate on this question. And to be clear, nothing's set in stone. There's nothing saying it's going out there. Like, that's putting the cart way before the horse. But is it a question that you would ask? Of course. I think in terms of transportation, one of the pluses that you could argue out there, similar down here, that you've got the bus stop here, just as one avenue of transportation, is that central transportation is located out there. So I think that adjusting a route or a couple routes to have it go through there and provide at least that part of access is something that would, in my mind, undoubtedly come up in those conversations, and you'd figure it out. But given its proximity to the kind of headquarters for the buses, that's probably an easier part of the discussion. But I know there's other elements to it that would also need to be discussed. So, but yeah, it's certainly something you'd want to fold into the overall thing, and it's maybe other people who have been around for the downtown or not debate who really have a good grasp on all of the pieces of that and what the county board grappled with. There's probably a peer you have on the board who can give you much more background than I can in terms of what was said 5-10 years ago.
I want to add to that. Just last Friday, the mayor and myself and Chris were invited to talk with the judges and the attorneys. We spoke for about 45 minutes on the topic, and that same question was brought up or raised by those folks as well. So, and we agreed it was a good question and something that we wanted to look at or be able to address. So, I think Supervisor Robbie had his hand up.
Yes, I just had I'm a little confused on the comparables that are given. You start out with about 150 million and divide it 4 ways to 37.5 million.
Oh, yeah.
And I take it that the 4, and I know that this jail skews it a little bit, but I take the 4 of the jail, the courthouse, the law enforcement center, and the fleet garage. And when I look at the comparables you give, it looks like the courthouse is a pretty good comparable, actually, about $1 million apart. But then I look at the Conto jail and learning and law enforcement center was 32 million, and in your given you'd be looking at closer to 74 million. And then the other building was the fleet garage, and there's no comparison at all. So it's hard for me to use these comparisons to say, hey, it looks like we're getting a pretty good deal. So I like those numbers fleshed out a little bit more, I guess.
Sure, I've done a much deeper dive on it. Today's numbers was just to kind of give you an approximate look at what other counties. There are vast differences in square footage.
I would assume so,
right? The
right.
facilities themselves. It's just to say, here are what other counties are grappling with, what those cost, just to kind of draw the ballpark to say, when you talk about $38.5 million for a courthouse, it's not something that's just completely out of, off the reservation, so to speak. It's like it's fairly normal in terms of in the realm of expectations today. But yeah, I've done much more on that, and none of these numbers or comparisons were meant to, nudge you in any particular direction either. So,
okay.
As the conversation moves forward, you'd certainly expect to see more of that kind of information. Say, if here's a direct comparable that makes sense, why does it make sense? And then you could see all the different factors of that, and that would be something you see at Space and Properties, probably at Finance as well, just to kind of, again, try to contextualize things in a way much better than what I've done here.
And I appreciate that, and thank you very much. At some point, I just a little better. I would need more information in terms of what kind of bang of the buck we're getting for that $150 million compared to what other people have actually spent in real dollars for their improvements for similar projects.
Supervisor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Executive Hallman. First is a comment, and I've said this before, and I'll continue to say that. If we're looking to the future, I would hope we can stop using the word jail and start talking about a corrections facility. I know they're just two words, but I think they're really critically important on what we perceive of the people in them and the outcomes we hope to achieve as a result of putting people there. So I will continue to harp on this as long as I'm here and people reelect me. I'm hoping we can look to corrections instead of incarceration.
Yeah, I've got no problem with what you call it. I agree with you. I think the current jail has lots of real positive programming, which we heard about from Judge Flugar, and that kind of shows the story of the Portage County Jail, especially in comparison to other jails. The reason I use jail is just because of statutory reference. It's similar, like with EMS negotiations, we refer to our partners as independent contractors because the IRS says you have to. It wasn't because we wanted to say we're not partners. But I take your point, and I think it's a very good one.
Words are important. It's kind of like in my industry, if someone says dump, I want to basically dump them because it's a sanitary landfill, highly engineered, and so your outcome is different in what you're expecting. So if we could start moving in that direction, I think it's a tribute to our ability to move towards progress. The other thing is as it relates to transportation, that's a critical issue for the city to consider because my understanding is if someone is to be released from the corrections facility, it's done at midnight. Mm-hmm. The buses don't run. And so I think what Supervisor Moa said is very important. And that then rests on the shoulders of the city in trying to create a transportation system to meet that need all the way, out to the new facility if that's the case. So I think adding that into the conversation now is going to be really important because City Council will have to consider how to staff and provide that level of transportation service.
Yeah, I would say it's already in the conversation, but it's still good to bring it up and to bring it up again and again. Same thing with operational costs that Supervisor Robbie brings up. It's another question we should ask again and again so you don't lose track of it. The last thing I'll say on the jail is just if it shows up in documentation that's official and it's only referring to statute, that's not trying to get away from your point, but I'll try to figure out where in here you can change the term and not have a big deal about it in terms of communication sense. But
thank you.
Sheriff, can you speak to the release time on that? I'm just curious now. She's piqued my curiosity. Do you release inmates at midnight?
It all depends on if there's somebody there to pick them up. It all depends on, there's a lot of factors that play, and we can also change that.
Okay. I just wanted, and it wouldn't surprise me, but I wanted clarification on it because it brings a good point, because if it is our process, I would think it would be something that we could change to make it for the better, so, or at least understand why it is that way.
Pieces and parts all have to work together.
Yep. Supervisor Bob Gifford.
Yeah, this is to follow up on Supervisor Mua's point about the transportation. I think now that we're taking part in the Future Regions Initiative, it's a good time to take another look at the concept of regional transportation authorities, because regardless of where the correction facility goes, we still find in the Transportation Coordinating Committee that there are gaps all over the map for moving our poor people, our elderly people, our disabled people, and our young student population around. And now that we have a governor and lieutenant governor that are somewhat more attuned to the concept of sustainability and equity, because transportation is a problem of equity, it might be the time to really put this back on the front burner and realize that, we tap out all the funds that are available in our grant proposals for transportation. So somehow the state legislature is going to have to find the money to do this, because And one other additional thing is, in their wisdom, the UW system decided to merge 3 campuses in 3 different cities, 35 miles apart, without a robust system of moving students from one campus to the other. And it's just we're kind of operating. We're trying to operate in a first world economy and a kind of a third world transportation network where everybody has to have their own car, and if you can't get your own car, you're in trouble. So that would be my addition to what
Thank you.
Supervisor Moore already said.
Thank you. Supervisor Splinter, then Supervisor James Gifford.
I think I brought this up in Properties and Space Committee meeting, but I thought I'd bring it up here too. In the planning of the overall, all the moving parts and all the different pieces yet, I think if I mentioned that I'm a longtime member of the Isaac Walton League, and 20 years ago we had an old broken down farm building, which we kind of adored in a way, but it was not functioning. The floor was ready to bust through, and the kitchen was out of code and everything else. So instead of putting lipstick on a pig back then, we all got together, and one of our guys was an architect and put together a really nice $180,000 building, which at first we thought was more than we could possibly build. But after looking at the building and the structure they put together, we came to the conclusion that that structure should suffice our conservation meeting needs for the next 100 years. And once we solidified that with our members came out and really generously supported that whole concept with money, time, blood, sweat, and tears, and we got that done. And so we've had that for about 20 years now, and with an 80-year trail, probably a little bit more than that. But on a small scale, like the Ikes, if we can do a 100-year plan and have it make sense, I think carries over to what we need to relate to our taxpayers, is that we're looking at all these factors, we're trying to get it down, but the idea is that when we get it conceptualized and quantified and paid for, that it's going to be good for 100 years. If you're selling me on a plan for this whole thing, it sells a lot better than a 50-year plan where you shoehorn something in downtown, and then 50 years you got another whole problem. I think people will get behind this if you say, we're trying to get a 100-year plan here, and maybe even more, but at least that. So if you can get that as your overall message within all your details, I think it would make the public feel better about the whole project too.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think to your point, you'd want to be as accurate as possible in terms of what you think the longevity is of any particular project. But just as a for instance, and you just made me think about it as you were talking, the building we're in now was built 61 years ago, and they paid like $1 million for it. But back 61 years ago, $1 million was a number that no one could really conceive of. But nevertheless, back then they got the support together like you're talking about and figured out, here's the plan, it's going to carry us forward for, maybe they said 50 years, I don't know. But at the end of the day, they got the resources together, they entertained this number that back then was beyond their imagination, and built the building that we're still sitting in today. So I think that, if you can articulate that same sort of process and same sort of, not storytelling per se, but the same sort of, here's why we're doing it, and here's the importance to the community, to the county, and what it can be for us moving forward, and give them that accurate picture for however long it can last based on our best knowledge at this point, then I think you're right. It does help to kind of make it not just building a building. Like there's more to it.
We're going to have many more discussions on this, so I'm going to Supervisor Gifford, and then Mildred had her hand up. Supervisor Neville had her hand up as well. So unless there's anybody else after that, that's where we're probably going to wrap it up. So Supervisor Gifford.
Chris, you made a nice press release about the city-county things. you are aware that there's a sizable portion of the county that says, oh my God, this has never come before the county, and it's a done deal. I don't know how you disabuse them of that, but I know it's out there. Yeah. But I'm in the same situation as Supervisor Robbie about costs. The swap deal with the city. We get 2 buildings, they get 2 buildings, we get some land. And it was just sort of, well, we don't know what we're going to do with this building. Has there been any consideration of, if we went to something like that, what we would do with this building?
Not in any detail, no. I think it definitely would be part of the conversation. I think the swap is generally looking at pieces that are just cleaner and more straightforward at this point. And, and as far as what we can communicate to the public, to me, it's just, stick to the truth and be honest with them about where you're at. And if people, think you're out here or out there, that something's, a foregone conclusion, I don't know what I can do about that, but hopefully your word stands for something, but at the same time, I'm also in the same space as you and Supervisor Robbie and presumably everybody else in terms of costs and everything else. So we're on the same page there, and that's the framing, I think, for where we're headed in terms of discussion.
Supervisor Neville?
On the cost issue, this relates to Supervisor Mulla's point. But I think we should look at it with all of it, is not just think of the cost for dollars that we put out, but the cost to the people who are using the facilities, because there's time, there's inconvenience. There could be lots of things that will impact people's lives from the point a decision's made and something is done. Going forward for that 100 years or 50 years or whatever. And I think we need to consciously look at that in looking at everything we do.
It's a complicated scenario. It's potentially possible that in 50 years, the center of the urban area is out there. Those are all extraterritorial properties the city can take. So in that sense, maybe things grow in that direction. I don't know. But also, even to where we are now, where we are now is convenient for a lot of people in the city, but it's not convenient for people down in Almond and Bancroft or up in Eau Plaine. They also have a long way to go. So I think you have to consider it, but it's similar to the EMS conversations we've had where, okay, if the EMS person is here and they're 40 minutes away, but they're only 3 minutes away from the people in the city, good for the city, but what do you tell the people out there? It's not an easy, answer to anybody in that regard, and it's not easy even to find that kind of center point that you can draw that happy radius around. But I do think that you're all right in terms of it's something you need to address, you need to figure out, even if the city does have an idea, and Plover for that matter too, because, you've got HH as that sort of dividing line. Is that kind of the general push? Is it 66? Is it is it just 10? And then that could, even though it's very preliminary for them in terms of vision and what their plans are, that could fold in the conversation and say, well, maybe there will be more development out there. There is more development happening south of there on County R. Maybe that creeps back up through some of those properties. We don't really know, but suffice it to say that I think the concerns you guys are voicing are very, very intelligent, excellent questions to ask and good points to raise. And I think that if you just don't see them being raised, make sure you bring them up again. But as far as I'm concerned, that we've talked about them at least a little bit at this point, but everything's still very much up in the air. But the further we get along in the process, I think the more you get to start to really shape where you're headed, whichever option it may be. And whichever option it is, I think those questions remain, right? Even if we weren't talking about this at all, the transportation's still an issue. People get dropped off at an ER by their friend, and then they have to wait till 6 in the morning for the cabs to start going before they can go home. It's an issue that, like Supervisor Gifford said, is a complicated one. It's tied to funding for us as much as the state, and also just the authority piece. So we're just really kind of touching on how complex all of this is, but that's our charge as staff, is to kind of get that picture in as best focus as we can for you, and then your questions and concerns and everything like that will further, define and refine what that looks like, so that ultimately whichever direction we decide upon, whatever that plan looks like, we're all comfortable with it. And similarly on the cost too, whether that's the debt schedule or access, these are all valid, and these are all concerns those especially we've been talking about. So thanks for your.
We've got one more. Supervisor Zastro.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just because I hope everybody keeps in mind that while technology may allow us to consolidate some staffing, that if you're going to be putting up a brand new pretty building, upkeep and maintenance on that building is going to be essential. Don't shortchange it there.
No, I agree. I mean, and Supervisor Robbie can attest to this, that in space and properties meetings and finance meetings, I call it the Todd principle in the sense of can we operate it? What is the cost to operate? You want to make sure you can operate it, but you also don't want to just build to a number and fall short of what your needs are. I think you're also hinting at another question that probably doesn't come up anytime soon, but if things keep going the way they are just in the budget, we're going to eventually get to a point where we as a body are going to have to ask, what is Portage County going to do now and into the future? Because if we continually don't get any support in the way of budget and funding and levy caps, that question gets harder and harder every year to do what we're doing this year. So point well taken.
Supervisor Barry Jakowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just like to caution us all, whether it's going to be a correction center or a judicial center or what we need for staffing, that we don't try to piecemeal a building together. I know the number's going to be large and it's going to be harder for us to sell it to our constituents, but I think most people understand, whether they built out of their house or built the one-car garage and needed to it cost a lot more to have to put up an exterior wall and then add on from there. Please, as you're out talking with your constituents, try to sell them the whole picture. Let's get it done for the next 50 or 100 years and not have to piecemeal a building together that maybe now one isn't compliant with the other. If we build it all together, everything will work. And I just would say, please, when you're out talking with your constituents, I know it's going to be a big number, but try to sell them the whole package and try to explain to them why we're doing it that way. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Chair.
It's a very good point. And just one last note, we'll also bring that sort of information to the committees and the board for consideration. So you see, what does it look like all at once? What does it look like if you do this, this, or this? Each potential path will have a projection to it so that you can see, all right, what does it look like if you need to build an exterior wall 5 years after the fact, kind of thing, which I hear you. I've been in that position, so.
And I guess in closing, I just want to say too, though, that the county exec and myself, for the last 2-3 months, it hasn't been a week hasn't gone by where the two of us haven't gotten together for 15 minutes, a half hour, and either talk to someone else or talk to ourselves to try and figure out how these pieces can be moved around and what can be done. And he hears it from me over and over, to Mr. Robbie's point and Mr. Gifford's point. I think we got approved for a $400,000 house, and we're kind of looking at a $500,000 house. We've got to figure out what we can afford and where we feel comfortable with it. And I know Calvin has heard it from Chris and I too, is that watching costs. But at the same time, to do it smart, if we need to make sure a department has an extra office, so as Mr. Splinter said, we're set up for 50 or 100 years. So later on, as the county grows and we need to add staff people, that we have room for those departments to grow. Otherwise, that's short-sighted. And I think the big thing is that I want to make sure that and Chris can speak to this, but myself, I want to make sure that I'm educating you folks, because you are the folks that are talking to the people that are talking and wanting to get the facts. We put it out on the media. We have events where we have open house, and as Stan has pointed out to me many times, nobody shows up. So it's the people that are talking to you one-on-one. So I want to make sure that you folks have the facts and you folks have the information so you can spread the message and explain to them why the need is and see firsthand. We had a lot of people, and Sheriff Lucas, I was with him, he spent 4 hours one night giving tours to people so they understood the safety concerns here in the courthouse and in the jail and some of the shortcomings. So if anybody has any questions later on certain things as far as information commissioner gets calls and they don't know what the answer is, please reach out to one of us, Calvin, Chris, myself, and please ask us, and we'll try and answer it. If not, we'll get back to you so that you can answer that person and get them the right information, and we can get the right message out there and make sure everybody's understanding what the process is and what our thought process is. And we're trying to make a logical decision based on the facts and the needs, and for long term, because hopefully in the long term is where the savings will be.
And I'll just reiterate that anytime you need any information or have a question, feel free to reach out to me. I'll keep tabs on, the question or content and who we're talking to, but it's really important to me that you guys feel that you're able to ring us up and figure out, hey, I heard about this, or I had this concern or this question or anything along those lines, because that information we can, intentionally bring back into this conversation where everybody hears it. And I think that has a lot of value to it. And it's a more, it's just more needed detail, really, than, we do our best to try to bring everything we've got to bear to these conversations, but you also have a lot of important contributions to the process and just to the conversation as we go, as we go forward.
Supervisor Splinter.
I just wanted to see if Chris could just kind of outlay what's going to happen at the public meeting next Thursday at 7 o'clock, so that those that are watching this, that are interested in the county proceedings would know exactly what's, it's kind of a joint city-county meeting, from what I understand. I'm not totally sure, so.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a joint project or idea. Everything's still very preliminary, so I mean, the point of the meeting is to kind of say, here's the ideas that have come up in the course of a conversation. Here are a series of opportunities that we can choose to take advantage of or not. For maybe there's good reasons to not do one or the other for either party, but similar to what I just said, like there may be members of the public who either can add a real positive message about why it's a good thing, which then folds back into the overall picture, or maybe there's concerns that nobody's thought of for some reason that can keep us from going down a wrong path. So really it's just going to be a broad conversation. There's nothing has been set in stone at all in that regard. So yet the plan A is there. The plan A is representative of here's one of the ways it could look, and here's why it could, why it is a plan A, and then see what people think. And like I said, there may be other combinations that make sense, but that'll be coming out of that conversation and anything else moving forward. There'll be a presentation, we'll have some discussions, but we'll all be on hand to just kind of like this session has been, like answer the questions on the fly based on the information that they have.
That's in the annex building, right?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you very
much, everybody. Number 1, Town of Alman Comprehensive Plan Amendment and Portage County Zoning Ordinance Map Amendments, Schmoody Property.
Resolution 106, 2018-2020, submitted by Planning and Zoning Committee, changing the Town of Alman Schmoody Property future land use designation from L1 Enterprise Agricultural to L2 Intermediate Ag, and amends the zoning classification from A1 Exclusive Ag to A2 Ag Transition.
Motion by Supervisor Barry Jakowski, seconded by Supervisor Moore. Any other discussion? All those in favor vote yes, and those opposed, no.
Ayes, 4 excused, resolution adopted.
Town of Stockton Comprehensive Plan Amendment and Portage County Zoning Ordinance Map Amendment, Zorowski Property.
Resolution 107, 2018-2020, submitted by Planning and Zoning Committee, changing the Town of Stockton Zorowski Property future land use designation from L3 Limited Ag Mixed Use to Commercial, and amending the zoning classification from A3 Low Density Ag to C1 Neighborhood Commercial and C3 Commercial.
Motion by Supervisor Morrow, seconded by Supervisor Rakowski. Any discussion? All those in favor with yes and opposed, no.
21 ayes, 4 excused, resolution adopted.
Number 3, authorization of a 2019 budget adjustment for the purchase of bus for rural transportation program at Central Transportation.
Resolution 108, 2018-2020, submitted by Commission on Aging, Aging and Disability Resource Center Board and Finance Committee. Budget adjustment resolution approves purchase of a bus and requires 2/3 supermajority vote.
Motion by Supervisor Pataki, seconded by Supervisor Bob Gifford. Discussion. Supervisor Barry Jakowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess my fault. I guess I just don't know what the bus is. I didn't dig into it deep enough and thought I could maybe get the question answered here.
We'll get you that answer.
Currently, the ADRC has 4 buses that the city now has possession of for the rural transportation, the rural transportation program, and it's time to replace one of those buses. The state actually pays 80% and we pay 20%.
Thank you.
That answer your question?
It certainly does, Mr. Chair.
Very good. Any other discussion? All those in favor, vote yes, and opposed, no.
Jeez.
21 ayes, 4 excused, resolution adopted.
Number 4, internal resolution authorizing not to exceed $8.325 million general obligation promissory note for Highway Department building project.
Resolution 109, 2018-2020, submitted by the Finance Committee. Resolution approves borrowing stated amount for Highway Department building project and requires 3/4 of member-elect vote.
Motion by Supervisor Rakowski, seconded by Supervisor Jankowski. Discussion. Supervisor Barry Jakowski.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. I only would like to comment that I've had some constituents ask about this particular building project in the increase in our registration fee, and when they did the math, they seemed to think it kind of lined up. But I ask that when anybody questions you on it, you try to explain the difference to them, that that's not where the increase in the registration is going. So I only bring that up and forewarn anybody who's questioned about it.
I had also clarified that in some of the history, and Nate, help me if I'm wrong with any of this, but I think this was approved in the 2015 capital improvements budget, so this was long before the registration was imposed, and it's been in the works for a long time, and there's a lot of different entities that are going to be involved with this, the EOC, the Sheriff's Department as far as a covered enclosed impound lot, storage for the trucks, the plow trucks. Jennifer, you wanted to talk as well on this, or? Yeah.
As Chair Haga said, this project initially came into the capital improvements plan in 2015. There are also some subsequent improvements that came in through law enforcement, through the sheriff's office. We ended up combining those because those all made sense to do as one project. So yes, this project has been in the works for quite some time. In terms of the vehicle registration fee, one of the things to point out as we kind of talk about this project, the vehicle registration fee offsets costs in your special revenue highway fund. The improvements that are done are at the highway enterprise fund side of the county's finances, so they actually happen in 2 different kind of funds within the county's accounting structure, so they're not related in that sense. One of the things that I did want to point out as you kind of go through, there's a series of resolutions in here. We have 2 different projects we're talking about, and each project has 2 separate resolutions. I just wanted to briefly explain to you the difference between the 2. The initial resolution is an intent resolution. That resolution, and it's the one that's on the floor right now, this actually authorizes the county to proceed with borrowing money. So with your approval tonight, you're providing authorization to do that. And that's why it requires a 3/4 vote. It doesn't actually sell the bonds. We don't actually borrow the money, but this is the authorization to do so. The second resolution is what's called a reimbursement resolution, and what that resolution allows is for the county to use the proceeds of that bond sale to reimburse itself for any costs that it has before we actually do the sale of that bond, and actually it's going to be promissory notes most likely. So that allows the county, if there are costs 60 days prior to today, if we had to go out and do some soil testing or some permitting or something of that nature, that we can reimburse ourselves for those costs. Architecture and design costs are always reimbursable, and those are included in this project as well. So that's why there are two. They do separate things. They're both very important. The other thing to note about this building project is that it's a combination of both a government project and a highway enterprise project. What we intend to do is borrow the money, sell the bonds, and we would pay back according to a schedule that the county could pay back through its debt service fund. We will be splitting out the cost for what the government side of the project costs and what the highway specific side of the project costs. The highway enterprise funds will pay back the county back to the debt service fund over a life cycle that they can afford to pay back. We will pay it back in probably a much more accelerated rate to keep those costs down the best we can, and work it into a debt schedule that the county can afford to utilize, but we will work specifically with the highway department to come up with a cost schedule that the highway department can afford to pay the county back. This is not unusual. We've done this before. We've done it with both the solid waste department and the healthcare center. So this is something that we've done in the past, and probably the best way to handle this project. Even though you have different resolutions before you in terms of two different projects, because of the timing, we will probably lump them together and sell one bond, and that way we can save on legal costs and on issuance costs as well. But because they are two separate projects, we wanted to make sure that you had two separate resolutions, or actually four separate resolutions, so you can talk to them specifically on each project on its own merits. So hopefully I didn't make it worse. Hopefully I answered some questions.
Anybody have any questions for Jennifer? Supervisor Barry Jakowski.
Thank you, Jennifer, but thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, why I brought it up, because I sit on KIP EDC, I thought I did an adequate job trying to explain it to constituents, the people that asked me about it. Not nearly as good as your explanation, Jennifer. But when people see construction going on at the highway department, and again, I caution you all as fellow supervisors that they're going to ask some questions, and not everybody's happy about the increase in registration fees. So please be ready to answer the question as best you can, or pass the question on to Jennifer.
I think you bring up an excellent point. I think people see money coming into the county and they just think it can be used anywhere for anything, and that's not how it works most cases. So that is an excellent point.
And thank you for your explanation, Jenny.
Thank you.
And I also made sure I explained that last night at Plover's Planning and Zoning meeting, too, to make sure the message gets out in the word to try and spread that as well. Somebody else? Supervisor Medin.
Could you give us a little bit of an explanation of the split between the general government part and the Pacific Highway part? And
To be
how
determined.
That applies to the $8 million and the $2.5 million?
So the 2.5 million is not part of the split. That's a whole separate project, not related to the building. So out of the roughly $3 million project, I believe it's about $6 million. 5.5 and 2.8. 2.8 on the government side and the 5.5 on the highway side.
And that's good to hear that, because I've been hearing the $5.5 million for 6 or 8 years. And so it's nice to be able to show that we're meeting that goal.
Well, and part of those early rough numbers were based on what we knew at that time. As you sit down with a design and architects and put things to paper, things change along the way. So, but this does have a lot of components to the project. It's kind of complicated, so.
And kind of as Chris had alluded to earlier, we've been talking about it for 3-4 years, and in 3-4 years, the costs have gone up. We've had a lot of natural disasters and floods and fires and other things, and that drives material costs up. So, supply and demand. Anybody else? Thank you, Jennifer. We have a motion? We got a motion and a second. If there's no further discussion, all in favor with yes and opposed, no.
ayes. 21 ayes, 4 excused, resolution adopted.
Number 5, resolution declaring official intent to reimburse expenditures on County Highway Department building projects from proceeds of borrowing.
Resolution 110, 2018-2020, submitted by Finance Committee declaring intent to reimburse. Requires just a majority vote.
Motion by Supervisor Pataki, seconded by Supervisor Dodge. Discussion. All those in favor with yes and opposed, no.
Twenty-one ayes, 4 excused, resolution adopted.
Number 6, internal resolution authorizing not to exceed $2.565 million general obligation promissory note for highway improvement projects.
Resolution 111, 2018-2020, submitted by Finance Committee, initial resolution approving the stated amount for highway improvement projects and requires 3/4 vote of the members-elect.
Motion by Supervisor Don Jankowski, seconded by Supervisor Zastro. Discussion. All those in favor with yes and opposed, no.
Twenty-one ayes, 4 excused, resolution adopted.
Number 7, resolution declaring official intent to reimburse expenditures on county highway project from proceeds of borrowing.
Resolution 112, 2018-2020, submitted by the Finance Committee declaring the intent to reimburse, majority vote.
I know I've got highway guys out there. I need a motion. Motion by Supervisor Johnson, seconded by Supervisor Gussel. Discussion. All those in favor with aye, or I'm sorry. All those in favor press yes and opposed no.
Twenty-one ayes, 4 excused, resolution adopted.
Number 8, revision to Portage County Ordinance, Chapter 2, Public Peace and Order, Section 2.28, regulation of boating upon Tomorrow River.
Resolution 113, 2018-2020, submitted by the Highway Committee, enacting a new ordinance and also includes a sunset clause of October 1st.
Motion by Supervisor Dubek, seconded by Supervisor Barry Jakowski. Discussion. Supervisor Zastro.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think if you look at the second whereas, the word "as" immediately following is not necessary. Whereas as part of the agency should just be whereas part of the agency.
Technical amendment. I got a motion. I got a second by Supervisor Barry. Oh,
Corp
I'm sorry.
Counsel's looking at it.
Did you find it, Dave?
Supervisor Zastor, are you in the second whereas paragraph?
That is correct. Right after whereas, the word "as" appears.
Right.
Whereas,
as. Not necessary.
Is our English major? Somebody's got to be an English.
Is it redundant?
Sorry.
At least
I think
you read it.
I think it fits.
That's fine if you believe it belongs. I withdraw my
Minor point, but I think it reads correctly.
Okay.
As is.
All right. Supervisor Barry Jakowski, do you have your hand up for something? No, or you're just seconding it?
I'll just withdraw my second. Then.
Okay. Any other discussion?
Nope.
All those in favor vote yes and opposed no.
21 ayes, 4 excused, resolution adopted.
Number 9, resolution designating the week of April 8th through April 12th, 2019 as Work Zone Awareness Week in Portage County.
Resolution 114, 2018-2020, submitted by Highway Committee designating Work Zone Awareness Week.
Motion by Supervisor Zastro, seconded by Supervisor Pataki. Discussion. Supervisor Johnson.
I said this last year, I think the year before also, that sanitation workers working on our roads, collecting our garbage and recycling, have the same protection as highway and construction workers.
And the people that are out on the highways, the tow truck operators, and the rest of those folks as well. So. All right. Any other discussion? All those in favor with yes and opposed, no.
Charlie, could you please confirm? Supervisor Gussel?
Confirm. Yeah, there you go.
21 ayes, 4 excused, resolution adopted.
Number 10, request for the College of Agricultural and Life Sciences at UW-Madison and UW Extension to develop nitrogen application rate guidelines for groundwater protection.
Resolution 115, 2018-2020, submitted by Land and Water Conservation Committee, requesting development of these guidelines.
Motion by Supervisor Barry Jakowski, seconded by Supervisor Martinson. And I believe there's an amendment for this one, Supervisor Zastro?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To keep this similar, very similar, if not identical to the, we proposed this at the Land and Water, statewide Land and Water Conference this past week, and there was an amendment made there, and I believe it's appropriate to put it in here also. It would go under the now therefore be it resolved paragraph, and at the very end, we can put the application rate guidelines for groundwater protection include fertilized lawns, golf courses, green spaces, and agricultural crops. So, and agricultural crops would be added at the end of that.
Down here. No, these green spaces. Yep, right there.
Supervisor Zastro, when we had talked earlier, you referred to including field vegetable and fruit crops. Have you decided to change that verbiage?
Yeah, yes, I have.
Supervisor Barry Jakowski.
I would second that technical amendment and would also add that it passed unanimously at our state convention.
Okay. I'll take a voice vote on the amendment. All those in favor with aye? Aye. Opposed? Amendment carried. Any further discussion? Supervisor Johnson.
Thank you. I'll be brief because I've got a birthday meal waiting at home. I'm just wondering if either at the convention or at the Land and Water Conservation Committee or at the GCAC group, if there was ever a conversation about the role of compost in moderating nitrogen leaching into the groundwater and its value in crop yield and slow release nitrogen. There's a fair amount of studies, mostly coming out of California, Salinas Valley, with soils very much like we have here, and they're seeing very similar crop production as when they're using commercial fertilizers, and they're seeing a growing amount of compost being used. I'm not saying it should be added into this, but I think it should be something to be considered as a valuable tool to manage nitrogen in the soil as far as its ability to leach into groundwater.
Supervisor Barry Jakowski.
Yes, to address Supervisor Johnson's concerns, we are taking into fact all nitrogens that are being presented to the soil, and that's why we're asking the UW system to work on those and work on them towards not most definitely yield production, but profitability production. Thank you for the question.
County exec and I were at at a seminar, I don't know, or a learning session at the Hancock Research Center, and they were talking about some of this stuff as well as the applications and nitrates, because it's expensive for them to put, it down, so they want to get it right and put just what they need to make sure that they're efficient. I'm always amazed when I go to that stuff that there's a lot more goes on in that farming than I had ever imagined being a city boy, so it's always a good learning process for me, so always an eye-opener, so. Anybody else? Supervisor Medine.
Just a quick question of the membership. It's customary to have everyone's signature on the resolution, and it seems to beg the question that maybe there was an amendment that wasn't available for everyone at the meeting. Why are the signatures not on? Good point.
Gary, have any idea?
I see they all have ayes and excuse, but Supervisor Barry Jakowski.
Yes, there was some amendments done to it, and Patty asked if it was okay if we just put an aye on it as she made those amendments, and we all unanimously agreed to it. But thank you for the question.
Yeah, County Exec, please.
This is actually tied into a conversation we'll probably be having later this year too, but part of the issue is that when we have electronic copies with signatures on there, people are pulling the signatures off and then using them to sign other documents out in the world. So by putting aye instead of nay, you can't pull that signature off of a document and use it for nefarious reasons. So being in the technological world we're in, these are kind of the new concerns that we're having to deal with. Same like the robocalls now have all local numbers or local cell numbers, so it's just a more refined process, but that's something we'll be grappling with, something that'll probably show up in a IT policy when it gets for finance and then you, but that would be, at least, if not the reason, it would be a good reason why that is the way it is.
It was what?
In other words, we're just ahead of our time.
I was also, I know it came up at one of the Wisconsin Counties Association when we were talking about different things, but I know my wife worked at the bank and she always said, don't sign the back of your credit card because somebody can see your signature to try and forge it later on. Then when you go and give the credit card, a lot of times people say, oh, can I see some ID? Okay, that's fine, yeah. But if I lose the credit card, somebody sees my signature, it's on the back. So there is some discussion. The other part of the other folks that aren't so trusting and honest are getting craftier, so we have to make sure that we're ready to respond to that and have some discussion about it. So, all right, we got a motion and a second. No more discussion. All in favor with yes and opposed no.
Gotcha.
Ayes, 4 excused, amended resolution adopted.
Number 11, support of 2019 LRB 1197 and Wisconsin legislative action to maintain and improve groundwater quality statewide.
Resolution 116, 2018-2020, submitted by Planning and Zoning, Land and Water Conservation, and Ag and Extension Education Committee, supporting legislature to maintain and improve groundwater quality.
Motion by Supervisor Rakowski, seconded by Supervisor Moresi. Discussion. All those in favor with yes and opposed no.
Ayes, 4 excused, resolution adopted.
I will take a motion to adjourn. Motion by Supervisor Johnson, seconded by Supervisor James Gifford. All in favor with aye? Aye. Opposed? Adjourn. Thank you.
Videos of these meetings are available for viewing on the city's website, stevenspoint.com/videos.